I wanted to like it. For the first hour or two, I think I had fun playing it. Something about its fatalistic middle-aged Catholic folklore setting drew me in. It was dark, filled with all kinds of saith and spoketh the miracle for which he shall lay dominion, which was cool. But after 7.5 hours, I have to put it down, guys. What am I talking about? Well, have you heard about Blasphemous? Blasphemous is a pixel art, sword-swinging metroidvania. You can peruse Steam reviews in a jiffy and get the common comparison to Dark Souls. And heads up, Dark Souls is a game I've tried to play countless times, but I haven't been able to manage to beat it. I guess that kind of foretold my fate with this game. For the first 5 or so hours of the game of Blasphemous, I thought I really was going to persevere, guys. I really did, but I couldn't. Blasphemous just isn't my cup of tea, and here's why. I just wasn't having fun anymore. To break down a Metroidvania, it's usually a non-linear 2D adventure where you slowly unlock new abilities that unlock new paths in this sprawling map. All the while you master platforming sections, you encounter well thought out enemies, and you manage to overcome tough bosses. Hollow Knight is the newest iteration of the Metroidvania craze that has made its resurgence in the past decade. But there's also stuff like Dead Cells, Ori and the Blind Forest, and Axiom Verge, all building and honing on the Metroidvania genre and trying to offer something new. Blasphemous is trying to do the same thing. And I'm no expert in Metroidvanias, but I've gotten my feet wet from time to time. Blasphemous has all those things I've mentioned. It's 2D, it's non-linear, you slowly unlock new abilities which unlock new paths in this kind of sprawling, interconnected map. But in Blasphemous, you're in a cursed and tormented world of Cvstodia, and the religious iconography is apparent in the first 30 seconds. You play a survivor of the miracle, a curse that has befallen the land, and so you're off to cleanse it. In the opening hours, I was really digging this game. The controls felt responsive, the platforming was simple and enjoyable with just enough complexity to give that half-second pause of appreciation of the, oh yeah, okay, that's how I'm going to jump there and there. And the creature types, the enemy types were varied and fun. The first boss was really creepy as shit, and I soaked it all up. These titanic deities that you met were delightful in this kind of eerie, bubonic plague kind of way. So after the first boss, you spend the first half of the game collecting these 3 visages. But after that part, which I guess is kind of like the turning point halfway, I found it painfully unclear where I was supposed to go and why. And because it was unclear at this turning point around the 4-hour-ish mark, I often relied on wikis or Reddit or the forums or something to help me figure out where I was trying to go and why, and where I was supposed to backtrack and why. And this led me to having to revisit sections of the map kind of over and over and over again. Normally, traversal is fun, or at least painless, but in the world of Cvstodia, it is not enjoyable at all. The environmental hazards aren't necessarily punishing, but they're kind of time-consuming. They make you wait around. The teleporting mirrors are probably one of the grievous sins, is that they're too far apart, and that the elevators you have to constantly revisit also just take up more of your time. And then you realize that you didn't get that thing over there in that place, which means your whole backtracking was not for the right reason, but for a different reason, so you have to go back and find a different approach to get a different thing, so you can go get across that gap to get to this place to do that thing. To be fair, it's not like these periods of zooming through zones was such a grievous time waster. There are greater sins in video games that take up your time. It was a few minutes at best. Unfortunately, in the case of Blasphemous, they just sucked me right out of it. They made me put down the controller and go, sorry, I'm not having fun, pardon me. Yeah, sometimes I like to talk to my game because, sometimes I feel bad or I get excited or whatever, okay? Okay, call me crazy. You know what also wasted my time, where I was not as apologetic? Enemy types. To strategically crush certain foes, you had to / pause, run, hide, /. This wasn't challenging, this was tedious. Blasphemous has a lot to offer when you're juggling 1 or 2 foes and it's quick and decisive, rather than this drawn-out combat. There were things I did enjoy about the game though, and I really like the religious theme of pain and punishment, both in its mechanical adaptation as well as its narrative arc. It's clear it has roots in medieval Catholicism and folklore, the strong emphasis on the bones of saints, the piety and the self-flagellation and the guilt of God. I found the score and musical elements and the sound design matched this haunting medieval tone that Blasphemous tries to portray as well. The pixel art to me, however, though, wasn't overly fantastic, but I did think that the artistic direction and the design of some of these monsters and bosses is just creepy and excellent. And additionally, mechanically, the guilt or the mea culpa was such a neat way of tying a narrative thing to a mechanical thing. By dying and thus invoking the guilt of failure, you're unable to collect as much fervor or magical power, so you can't activate the blessings or the spells of your faith as frequently. However, the mechanics of the game from a combat perspective were still problematic. I found the difficulty of the game is all over the place. Was it ever worth it to fight enemies? I learned halfway through my playtime it really wasn't. Running was easier. Bosses were easy, save for a handful. If enemies are more difficult than the bosses they spawn, they create this mode of play where you just kind of zoom around from important zone to important zone. And platforming was unfun. A particular passage through the mountain peaks was mildly frustrating, and this is not because of the design, but rather sometimes the responsiveness of platforming itself. It was kind of ambiguous. When am I going to ledge grab? How do I climb that ladder? How much can I be over that ledge? Can enemies knock me off or not? Can I slide through enemies to get to that platform or not? There is a crypticness to the storytelling that is evocative of Dark Souls. Heck, it's just a Souls-born thing. My problem always with this kind of narrative design is that to me, it's not really storytelling in a traditional sense. It's kind of world building and storytelling by accident. I think there's a difference there. In learning about these separate tidbits of lore while sounding oh so cool, it was as interesting as a midsummer Catholic mass, and hint hint, those are very interesting masses. The only parts of the game where I had a modicum of care was when there was something happening to me or before me, not reading about the bones of St. Matthew or whoever the heck it was. And I know this is going to put me at ends with some of you watching, but you know what? It just wasn't for me. But if you like all this stuff I've mentioned, it's going to be worth that roughly $28 price tag. I know I had at least 3 hours left of my playthrough, which wasn't even tackling half of the side quest, which, no wait, okay, wait a second. If they can be called side quests, or are just a collection of random items that somehow have a relation to some of these rooms that you come across, but actually have a whole subtext of how they all interact with one another. Maybe I'm just dumb. But the only quests I was able to finish were because I found hints of them online. For example, I only found out by looking online that you had to find this one specific relic tucked away in a non-obvious location of the map in order to traverse through the miasma. And then finding out that crossing the miasma in one particular zone also required boots that let you jump in water, and in order to do that, you're supposed to be helping out this pilgrim this whole time with his quest. But did anyone tell me that? I don't think so. And that's when I raged. I put down the controller again, and I said, "Pardon me, good game Blasphemous. I'm gonna stop now and, go watch some Netflix." All of this accumulated into a general sense that completing Blasphemous was not going to provide a sense of satisfaction that outweighed the further toil. But some people really enjoy this kind of world exploration and gameplay. But not me. So I put Blasphemous down. I think it's a good thing to admit that as a gamer you don't have to like everything, and sometimes stuff just isn't fun. Far too often we have this sense of obligation to play something to the end, to be hardcore or a real gamer or whatever. But if all of my agony and struggle sounds tantalizing to any of you, I encourage you to go out and try it. There's some kind of experience to be had in this medieval Catholic folklore metroidvania. But for me, John at Questmarker, Blasphemous gets a neutral positive if score. This is a game I can appreciate from afar, that I had a bit of fun with, that left a solid impression with me, but is not something I would outwardly recommend unless you like 2D Metroidvanias, unless you are a rabid Souls-esque completionist, or, like the Penitent One, you relish in the suffering a game can giveth.